Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2024 FIDE World Blitz Chess Championship. This tournament, the Swiss section of it has already ended, and here's a look at the standings for the Blitz Chess Tournament. And of course, at the very top, in the top spots, of course, they are dominated by the elite players, and everyone is familiar with. And we see that Niemann is in first place, Fabiano Caruana in second, and we have Magnus Carlsen in third. Now, this is actually very interesting because Magnus, if you guys know the drama that happened earlier, Magnus was he quitted the last 2 rounds of the rapid due to some dress code problems. He wore jeans to the tournament, and FIDE told him to change, but then this story is just really common, and I think you guys all know it, and I'm not going to repeat the story again. But anyways, and yes, the same players as we see in the top are for those were penalized by FIDE during the rapid tournament a few days ago for wearing jeans. That's right, the jeans chess players are back. I won't repeat the whole story, as I've just said, but you can actually check out the news on chess.com. The story there about Magnus and also some other drama that happened in the tournament are more the stories there are more accurate. Also, here we see that he secured the top spot and advanced to the Blitz quarterfinals with the highest score. And you should know that in the Blitz section, in the Blitz tournament, it's no longer similar to the Rapid, but instead there is a Swiss and then a knockout. In the Swiss part, the players in the top 8 will qualify into the knockout, and then in the knockout we will decide who the champion is. And truly, experience counts for a lot. But the most intriguing and talked about moment of this tournament so far was the matchup between none other than Magnus Carlsen and Hans Niemann. Yes, and those two, they have crossed paths again, and what a twist. There's actually a famous saying in China. It's called 冤家路窄, meaning people who dislike or want to avoid each other, but just still somehow keeps running into each other. And it's truly fascinating. So today I'll dive into their game, which had happened in the Swiss round 11 during the qualifying stage. And let's look at this game. It's actually very interesting. Magnus here is with the white pieces, while Hans is with the black pieces. This is round 11, and both players are actually having a very good run of the tournament so far, but still winning this game, or at least not losing this game. Losing this game will be very bad and will hugely affect both players' rankings. But let's jump in. This game actually was, it's a Blitz game, so of course not as accurate as classical games or rapid games, but we can also learn a lot of things from Blitz games from these top grandmasters because they make mistakes as well, and the mistakes that they make are definitely mistakes that we might also be making. So we can learn a lot of things. Alright, without further ado, let's start. Magnus plays e4, Hans plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, and Magnus played knight c3, which is the 3 knights opening, and after knight f6, the 4 knights opening. h3 was played here. Now h3, there are also many possibilities here, like bishop b5 or d4. d4 actually can transfer back, if I'm not mistaken. Well, actually cannot transfer back into the Scotch. I was saying that it can transfer back, but in the Scotch, it was something like this instead. I'm just going to quickly show it to you guys. In the Scotch, it's this. And here we have knight f6. Oh, and actually the position that we've just seen, the knight was on c3. So here, instead of playing knight c3, you can also take on c6, and this is called the Scotch opening. Also a very big opening nowadays. Here, knight d3, knight f6, and h3 was played. h3 is a move that is very necessary here to keep control of the g4 square, preventing any knight g4 or bishop g4 ideas in the future. d5 was played, very logical, takes, and here, knight takes d5. Bishop b5 pinning the knight, threatening the e5 pawn. Here, knight c3 was played, and of course, b takes c3. As for white doesn't really want to offer a trade of queens this early, because after queen takes, king takes, not only does white loses the opportunity to castle, but here after bishop d7, black is going to go long castle on the next move, and white is going to waste a couple of moves on moving this king, and the development will be very slow. There's also bishop c5 ideas coming to attack the f2 pawn. So of course you take with the b pawn, and bishop d6 was played, defending the e5 pawn here, and short castle, short castle. This is all theory. Rook e1, rook e8, d4, bishop d7. And actually, some of you guys might be wondering, why not taking on c6? Because after b takes c6, black will have this really ugly pawn structure. And for sure, it is an ugly pawn structure. But here you see that black has the bishop pair. And I'm just going to ask you a question. How are you going to attack these pawns, even if they're ugly? c6 is, of course, the weakest pawn in all of them. But how are you going to attack this pawn? And also, black has the bishop pair, which can cause a lot of chaos. e4 might be coming. Black is much faster in development as well, with this open b file as well in black's hands. And that is why you don't take on c6. Here, d4 was played instead by Magnus. Right now, this is move 10 in the game, and Magnus still has 3 minutes and 4 seconds on the clock, which means that he is blitzing out each move without any thinking. And here, Hans only has 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes actually, which meant that here Magnus already had some time advantages. In the game, bishop d7 was played, and here rook b1 defending the bishop, very secure, a6, and here bishop d3 going back. Now, if you want to take on c6, you can actually just take it here, because after bishop takes, there is like d takes e5, and you're like up a pawn, bishop goes back. But of course, again, bishop pair is very strong, and sometimes a bishop pair, if it's an active bishop pair, then it can equalize as a material like +1. Sometimes even if you are up a pawn but your opponent has a very active bishop pair, that pawn doesn't really count. And especially here, white has a very ugly pawn structure. And of course, black is going to be fine here. In the game, bishop c6 was not played. It is possible, but instead bishop d3 was played, which is also very logical. And e takes d4 was played, rook takes d8. Actually, c takes d4 would have been a much better option here, waiting for black to trade. And after queen takes e1, at least you gain control of the e file first. And probably, if black, the b7 pawn here is also being attacked right now, probably you go for something like b5 to defend it. But bishop g5, something you're developing your pieces as well as attacking your opponent's pieces. This is very messy actually, but it's still close to an equalized position. In the game, rook e8 was played, which is not bad. Queen takes e8, and here knight g5 was played. But still, if you want to play this very positionally, you just take on d4, and that's a very normal game. But here instead, Magnus played knight g5, deciding first of all to sacrifice a pawn, or deciding that at least I'm not going to take back on d4 right now, and I'm threatening your h7 pawn. And of course, Hans needs to do something, and in the game he played h6. Knight e4 was played, of course, trying to get one of black's bishops off the board. Queen e5 was played, threatening some very naughty ideas on h2, and that is why knight d6 was played, because then there's no good way for white to really prevent queen h2 from happening. If you go f4, then there's queen e6. These pawns might be they're floating a little bit, and white's king might be a little bit unsecured. In the game, knight d6 was played. Now white has the bishop pair, but is down a pawn so far. Queen d6 takes, knight takes. Here, the first mistake. Before this move, there were all just some small inaccuracies. But here, Magnus is the one who made the first mistake. And actually, this is just like a blunder. Even though it is just given for 1 question mark, but I think it deserves 2 question marks. In the game, I'm gonna ask you guys, what will you play here? Right now, the b7 pawn is under attack. So are you brave enough to take on b7, or you just want to play for something like bishop e3 to develop the pieces, and it's like that's that. In the game, Magnus decided to risk everything and he played rook b7, but it turned out this is a mistake. However, in the game, Hans didn't make the best reply. He missed the opportunity to win. The move here is actually to go knight b5, and suddenly you realize for white that this rook is kind of trapped inside on b7. Now, of course, first of all, you cannot take on b5 because it's pinned, but what else can you do? Like, the rook is going to get trapped, for example, with bishop c6 coming up. Here, the best move is to go like bishop b2. There's no way to prevent bishop c6, and after bishop c6, I mean, this position is just really tough for white to play. White is just going to be simply down a lot of material, probably has to go a4, but then there's bishop b7, and you're just down half a piece. Here, if you go a4 immediately, there's, of course, bishop c6 takes, reaching the same position. Doesn't really matter, and it should be winning, right? But it's a blitz game, and sometimes it's not that easy to spot these kinds of tricks. Even though here knight b5 looks kind of like obvious, really, but like it looks really obvious to me at least. But you're the one who is watching this game, not the one who is playing this game. So the situation is completely different. The pressure is completely different. In the game, Hans played bishop c6 immediately, but the rook just simply goes back to b1. Here, Hans played rook e8, then a couple of normal moves, bishop e3, knight b5, queen g4. So white here is actually looking for some counterplay on the king side, trying to sneak in with the queen and the bishop working together. In the game, bishop d7 was played, preventing any queen f5 ideas. In the game, queen b4 was played, offering a queen trade. And after... And here, actually, queen b4, here, Hans made his first mistake. Well, bishop c6 is considered as a miss, but still, at that point, black is still better. But at this point, Hans made a mistake, which gives white a lot of opportunities. I mean, here there are actually many options for the queen to go to, like queen d5, queen e5, even taking on b4 is fine. But some of the squares are not great for black, and in the game, Hans just chose a square to place his king on, which is not queen on, which is not a good square. He played queen f6, but the problem is that there's now a4 and knight d6 back. There's now very tricky move. Like, white is not winning, but white does have some positional advantage here. White here played queen a5, attacking both of these pawns. Suddenly, black is in some trouble here. Right now, the position, the material are equal, and white is threatening to to win a pawn. Also, Hans only has 17 seconds left on the clock, so this is actually a really bad situation for Hans. He played knight f5, the best move. Queen takes e7, bishop takes a4, the best move, with only 10 seconds left on the clock. Hans is playing out each move accurately and also really fast. Here, bishop c5 was played, and now Hans actually made another mistake. He played knight h4, but who can blame him? He only has 10 seconds left on the clock. And if I were playing as black, I don't even know what to do. I might even play something even worse than knight h4, even losing directly on the spot. Knight h4 is a mistake, but of course, there are some tricks. Now, rook b4 would have been immediately winning because you're attacking the bishop as well as putting some pressure on the knight. And if the bishop drops back, well, actually, the bishop can't really go anywhere because if you go there, there's actually now rook f4, winning the knight. Because if you move here, you'll lose the f7 pawn, that's for sure. So actually rook b4 just wins material on the spot. And Magnus here, he has 1 minute left on the clock, and I think it's enough for him to calculate all of these things. But maybe he was also under a lot of pressure, and in Blitz games, anything can happen, and instead he played rook b8, just giving back all of the advantage that he had earlier. And after queen e6, Magnus here is still better, but he should have played bishop b4 to prevent any queen e1 ideas to control of the dark squares. But instead he played king h2, running away directly. And now actually just for black it's very simple, just to move move the pieces back and forth. Queen d5 also is possible, even threatening some queen g2 mating ideas. But instead here, Hans actually made a blunder that is not directly losing, but just doesn't feel right. He played bishop c6. Now, the advantage here that white has is not as great as the advantage that Magnus had when black here played knight h4, because there's rook b4 winning material already. Here, bishop c6 is more like a positional blunder. And in the game, Magnus it's really funny because both players, they never really played the best reply here when their opponent made blunders or mistakes. And here, bishop d6 would have been the best move, or rook b6 also makes sense. But instead, Magnus just decided to go back with queen g3. This is just way too passive. And now, knight takes g2 was played. Suddenly, white is just running out of counterplay. Magnus here decided to play bishop d4. And after threatening the g7 pawn, threatening mate in 1, and Hans just defends with g5. Even though the pawns may seem floating in the air, but black's king is completely fine here. The knight is jumping out on f4 on the next move. And after rook takes e8 here, both sides actually agreed to a draw. I'm not sure who offered the draw. Maybe you guys can check on the videos that the streams where that might show that who offered the draw. But here, both sides agreed to a draw, which I can actually understand because Hans here only has 5 seconds left on the clock, and Magnus doesn't really have a very comfortable position because after queen e8, the knight can always jump out. The knight is actually really active here, and Hans is also up a pawn, so it's not that easy for Magnus to really play, and he only has 20 seconds left on the clock, and who knows what will happen if these two plays on. So after rook e8 here, both sides agreed to a draw. This was a game that is full of ups and downs. There was a time where Hans was just winning, and there are 2 times where Magnus was winning, but both of them couldn't really find the best reply, and that's that. The game ended in a draw. It's not an unexpected result, actually. It's just a really normal result for 2 strong players. And after this game, there were 2 more rounds, I think, and both players in the end, they qualified into the knockout. And most, the funniest thing is that in the knockout, I'm going to show you guys, in the knockout here, they are facing against each other in the first round. Magnus playing against Hans. Even though they dislike each other, there has been a lot of drama that has happened between them, which made them dislike each other. But still, and of course they want to avoid, but they just keep running into one another, and that is what's happened. Alright, anyways, so I hope you guys enjoyed this game as well as this video, and please subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.